Alright YouTubers, how you diddling? This is the Disposalist and this will be my 10th guide for Battlefield 1. In this video I am going to talk about planes. Much like the tanks, I believe that a lot of people don't even know there is a customised screen for the planes. They are snapped up at the beginning of the game and continue to be snapped up, very popular and limited resource. So I think a lot of people don't get the chance to click on there and go to the customize screen and look through the variants. So I am going to describe those in this video. So to begin with, the fighters and their variants. So these are the smallest but fastest and most maneuverable planes in the skies in Battlefield 1. There was a recent patch that's improved the attack planes to be quite close in performance, but the fighters still have the edge. They also have the most capable forward-firing machine guns in order to be taking out other aeroplanes. Also, fighter planes have good control over their airspeed. Using the forward and backward keys, they can increase and decrease their airspeed. Decreasing, of course, you may want to do to hang back from a target you're approaching to stay out of range of its rear gunners while you attack with your front guns, or you may even want to try and cause a chasing enemy to overshoot you. Of course, you lose your turn speed when you reduce your airspeed, but yeah, you make them overshoot. Increasing your speed, of course, you might want to use to close to a target or to try and escape a target, and it also increases your turn in order to try and outmaneuver and escape a chasing enemy. So the first variant to look at is the Dogfighter, and you can imagine from the name this is intended to be fighting other planes in dogfights in the air, and it has those forward-firing twin heavy machine guns making short work of other aeroplanes. As I said, fighters do have the highest velocity, most impressive forward-firing machine guns intended for taking out other aeroplanes. They don't do much damage to ground targets. You really have to be very accurate. There's very little splash damage to infantry. Their secondary fire, in a recent patch this was added, a secondary fire is incendiary ammo, which has improved characteristics for damaging enemy planes. So hitting their wings, hitting their tail fins with that incendiary ammo is intended to do a lot of damage to the maneuverability of enemy planes, disabling their wings, that sort of thing. In practice, I found there isn't much ammo. I think there's 15 rounds only before it takes quite a long time to recycle, to reload, and it doesn't seem to do an awful lot of damage to wings and tailplanes at the moment. That's the intention. Perhaps they'll give that a tweak later on. Planes have a secondary function, much like tanks can drop smoke or poison gas. The secondary function for the Dogfighter is the speed boost. Now, it's not entirely natural to me, so you guys might not really get this either. A speed boost does indeed give you a speed boost. It could get you out of trouble nicely, but it also improves the maneuverability of the plane. Now, I don't think it gives you necessarily a tighter turn, but because you're going faster and as tight as normal, you will turn faster than you did with the speed boost on. So effectively you can turn faster, you can outmaneuver other planes in the sky whilst using that speed boost, and it recycles quite quickly, so you can use it quite a lot. It does make it the true dogfighter in the sky. The next fighter variant is the Bomber Killer. Now these have twin front-firing heavy machine guns also, but these are the TUF, the Tank und Flieger, tank and aircraft cartridges, and they are slower velocity. They kind of float through the air to your targets. They make it a little more difficult to take out quicker moving enemies like planes, but very effective against bombers and attack planes to a lesser extent. They do more damage than the Dogfighter's heavy machine guns, but because of that slower speed it means the Dogfighter is still an easier choice for taking out faster moving targets like enemy aircraft. You've also got the 6 explosive rockets. Again, these are quite slow moving, but these are devastating if you can get them on target against a bomber. Not so difficult. An attack plane, more difficult. Very difficult to get them on target against a fighter, but devastating when they do. You also have, as a secondary function, the emergency repair for the Bomber Killer. This is actually making them quite effective in dogfights in some ways. If you can get used to those slow-moving front-firing weapons in a dogfight when you're being damaged, also the emergency repair can really give you the edge. But its main function is to let you stay on target even when rear gunners from attack planes and bombers are hitting you. And the last fighter variant is the trench fighter. Now this is, as it says, primarily a dogfighter, but it has the extra capacity to harass infantry on the ground with anti-personnel bombs, these darts bombs that they have. Now the front-firing twin heavy machine guns are much like the dogfighters' front-firing heavy machine guns, perhaps not as effective, I may be imagining that, but they are high-speed rounds effective at dogfighting. And the explosive darts are indeed quite effective anti-personnel bombs. You have to be reasonably accurate with those these days. They have been patched, nerfed over the last few months, but I think they were overpowered to begin with. So now, yeah, you can take out 1 or 2, maybe 3 people if you hit them well, if you aim well on the ground. The secondary function is the spotting flare, further enhancing your capability of hitting ground troops. You'll find when flying, you fire that spotting flare on the mini-map, you see your enemies are spotted, but they're not actually spotted in the 3D. One thing I should say about all planes, when looking from the air, if you actually press that spotting key, you have a much improved spotting capability compared to when you're an infantry guy on the ground. So the spotting flare may not show people up in the 3D spotting just on the minimap, but because you know where they are in the minimap, you know where to point and press that spotting button, and then they will all light up for you to do a pass with your explosive darts. So next up I'm going to talk about attack planes. Now attack planes are larger two-seater aircraft. They are somewhat slower than fighters and somewhat less manoeuvrable. They used to be quite a lot less manoeuvrable, but that was increased in a recent patch. We'll see if that gets tweaked further. I think they really are very close to the manoeuvrability of fighter planes now, so much so that there aren't many people using fighter planes in the air, but that may get tweaked, as I say. They have a rear gunner. All 3 models have very similar rear gunning capabilities, and those rear gunners on an attack plane can actually face forward, and you can shoot through your pilot and through the wings and through the tail without doing yourself any damage, which is interesting as a capability. I really think they are somewhat overpowered because of this, but that is the case, and they are very effective against enemy planes. You get a fighter on your tail. If you have a decent gunner, that fighter really cannot stay there for very long. Not so much dogfights can be had against the attack planes if they have a rear gunner. You really have to, as a fighter, stay at your distance and chip the health away from that distance out from the rear gunner. Now, in the attack plane also, that rear gun is doubly useful, because even if you don't have a rear gunner, you can set the plane on a level, even with a slight incline, just to keep it safe, and you can, as a pilot, leap into that second position. You can change position in your plane, leap into the rear gun, attack a chasing fighter, and then jump back into the pilot seat before you go out of bounds, and certainly before you hit the ground. It's a very effective tactic. So the first variant to talk about is the ground support attack plane. Now this has a forward-facing high explosive autocannon which fires, as we've seen in the tanks, like a machine gun, but is firing high explosives anti-vehicle rounds. In this case it's actually quite small caliber, so it's most effective against troops. It actually does good splash damage and good damage against troops, and some small damage against vehicles. It has quite a low velocity, so it's difficult to aim against fast moving targets like other planes in the sky, but good to open up troops with on the start of your bombing run. And at the end of that bombing run you are dropping 8 10-kilogram fragmentation bombs, devastating if you aim them correctly. They don't have a massive wide drop range, but good if you aim them well. And to help with that aim, your secondary function is a spotting flare, which, as I said, with the trench fighter, if you drop over your target, your enemies will show up on the minimap, and then on your bombing run you can use the 3D spotting to further show exactly where they are and to help your aim on that final run. And next we have the Tank Hunter attack plane, and we can see it doesn't have forward firing machine guns. What it has is an engine mounted cannon. Now this is quite a high caliber for a plane, a 37mm nose cannon, and that is anti-vehicle primarily. You can do a fair amount of splash damage on infantry, but it's a single shot and low velocity, so difficult to aim. And the follow-up for the bombing run is two 50kg high explosive bombs. So this indeed, as you'd imagine from the name Tank Hunter, is intended to be anti-vehicle. It has as its secondary function an emergency repair, a quick repair, but just for the wings there, much like with a tank quick repair on tracks. This just repairs the wings, so if you lose manoeuvrability, any damage to the wings, includes the tail pane, I believe, you can instantly repair those and not smash into the ground using this quick wing repair emergency function. And the last attack plane variant is the Airship Buster. This is much like a ramped up version of the Bomber Killer fighter. So it has this forward firing TUF heavy machine guns. Again, that's a slow velocity but high damage round. And effective against infantry, some splash damage against infantry, you can use it that way. And the secondary function is those explosive rockets, but on this attack plane you have 8 as opposed to the Bomber Killer's 6. It calls it the Airship Buster, and of course it can be used against the airship, but those are also devastating against enemy bombers, attack planes, fighters if you can manage to hit them. And you can see its secondary function is the speed boost, and I believe I'm right in saying that with that speed boost enacted, they actually have better manoeuvrability than everything but the fighter plane, the dogfighter plane. So lastly, we are going to talk about the bomber, and this is what we're looking at. That big monster is the tank of the skies, really, dropping a range of high explosive and demolition bombs. It's got 3 personnel on board. The pilot, of course, is in control of the bombing. It has a front gunner with a high explosive auto cannon, and that's that light caliber version of what we've seen on the tanks. It's very effective against infantry, doing a good amount of splash damage. You don't have to aim too precisely with that, which is handy from the heights that bombers will generally be operating. You've got a rear gunner with a light machine gun, much like the attack plane, except he does have somewhat restrictive angles of attack. You've probably got the rear, less than the rear 180 degrees of view, though you can fire upwards and downwards to a good extent. And the bomber himself, as I say, has control over the bombs and various other functions, which I'll get to when I talk about the variants. The first variant to talk about here is the Barrage Bomber. Now, this is equipped with 2 250kg demolition bombs. They're called demolition bombs, and sure, they do a lot of damage to buildings, but I'd say their primary function in game is to take out those heavy tanks and other vehicles. I believe even one of those, they drop quite close together. They drop together when you press the fire button, but even one of those hitting a heavy tank can destroy it, I believe. And the secondary bombs there are 4 50kg high explosive bombs, which are very damaging to troops and some damage to vehicles also. The secondary function of the bomber here is the spotting camera, and this is a little tricky to function. You can't be using it in third-person view, you have to be in first-person view and aiming as if you're going to be firing the bombs, and then when you're looking down through the bomb aimer, use the secondary function. Anything that you see will be spotted on the minimap for your team. So our next variant is the Firestorm Bomber. Now this is your anti-infantry bomber. It has a loadout of 9 incendiary bombs, and that really does roll out a red carpet of flame, and those stay burning. It's not just an instant explosion, they stay burning much like incendiary grenades do. And it has 16 10-kilogram fragmentation bombs, a low yield but brilliant for infantry, so there's a real carpet of devastation left behind this thing. And its secondary function is the emergency wing repair. And our last variant is the torpedo bomber, and look at the size of that thing. It's pretty obvious what this is for. You drop the torpedo into water and it will run along in that direction on the top of the water, impacting on whatever it hits. I haven't seen this used against anything but the behemoth, the dreadnought that appears on some maps, and I can imagine it would be a little hard to aim at the smaller boats. It'll maybe come into more use in the downloadable content for the DLCs in the future. But it also has 2 demolition bombs, much like the barrage bomber. These are smaller yield, 115 kilograms, but I'm sure that they will still be pretty devastating against land vehicles. But they're intended, I'm sure, as a finisher to the torpedo run. You would drop your torpedo, and then when you get overhead your target, as your torpedo is running along the water to it, you drop in a couple of demolition bombs to finish it off. The secondary function there is wing emergency repair. So those were the planes and their variants. Thanks for watching. Leave me a thumbs up if you like this video. Leave me a thumbs down if you must. Please do leave some comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your ideas. Cheers, YouTubers. Thanks for watching. See you next time.